by LSU standards, they didn't lose that much to the NFL draft. Again, by LSU standards, still significant players going to the NFL. But they look to be fortified across the board with most likely the best running back in the game, two quality receivers that I would really love to see get the football as much as they should. And, of course, Jamal Adams leading a defensive secondary that's as good as any in college football. But the quarterback situation, Chad. So LSU, is it going to be finally them breaking through and challenging Alabama like they were in the 2009 to 2011 and 12 range? Or is it going to be the LSU team that beats up on everybody, but when they really face the best teams, they just don't have the offensive firepower to make it happen?
You got to think last year it was Fournette, Geis, Fournette, Geis, at times. And you just really couldn't, despite your trying, those were one of the exceptions where you load 8 guys up in a box and you just hope and pray that you get a guy in the right position to make the play. And a guy like Fournette, you can give the offensive line credit as well, but Fournette made a lot of plays on his own as well. He's just a physical beast. He's hard to get down. He's a guy that, as again, Howard Matthews found out at A&M, like you were talking earlier, he found out roughly what it was like to get trucked there and on national TV. So, I think with the addition of Damian Craig from Auburn, former Auburn quarterback, working with the wide receivers there at LSU, Cam Cameron did invite him to come and work with Harris and the quarterbacks. I think that is going to be extremely beneficial. You look at the success, I kind of relate this to another program in the SEC, and that is you look at the success that Brandon Allen had with Dan Enos, who was a former quarterback at Michigan State, coaching there at Central Michigan, becomes the offensive coordinator at Arkansas. You look at the fact that of how much success Brandon Allen and how good he looked, stepping up into the pocket, just looking like he was going through his progressions. Last year would throw away the ball, not so much overthrowing the guys, but just throw the way the ball and making smart decisions at times, albeit not all the time. But that being said, the impact of having somebody who understands the game and understands what it's like to be in that pocket and has had success could be greatly beneficial to a guy like Harris. And I think that that's where an area that I'm interested to see. He's been under Cam Cameron now a couple years, when it was Harris and Jennings going flip-flopping back and forth there for a season. LSU had somewhat marginal success, but they still relied a lot on their defense and, of course, relied on the run game. This last year with Brandon Harris, it was quite obvious it was mostly Fournette. That being said, Harris had a couple 200-yard passing, but that was very few, very, very few last season. So you look at that, you just come back and you say, all right, man, what's it going to be this year? He's got to be able to get it. I just want to see Brandon Harris succeed on the field. I don't want to hear about it so much anymore because I've seen him for the last couple of years and it just hasn't been there for LSU. And it seems like that has just been an area of concern for them as the quarterback position. I feel like this year, defenses are really going to try to key in on Fournette. Typically, when a player has a lot of success in the SEC, the next year coming back, defensive coaches do a great job in the offseason of studying tape, and they try to limit those guys from having success. So they're going to have to find a way to get the ball in the air and have a threat that's going to make defenses at least stay somewhat honest. That being said, they're still going to feed Fournette quite a bit, but Brandon Harris is going to have to be able to pull his load at LSU this year, for them to have a lot of success, especially if we're talking about getting to the SEC championship game.
Yeah, Chad, we're in a day and age when most quarterbacks across the country, because of the sophistication of the passing offense, because of the nature of throwing underneath quite a bit, and also because these kids come out of high school so polished and prepped that it's not uncommon for these kids to hit 65 to 68% of their passes. Now, LSU is going to take their shots downfield a little bit more than the average team, a little bit more, because they've got that kind of athlete and they want to go for the big play action pass. So you can live with, I think a good year out of Brandon Harris would be him completing 58, 59% of his passes. He had some just wretched games against marginal, and I'm being kind here, marginal opponents here. Syracuse had an awful defense. Before, despite their record, they actually had decent defenses. But last year, they were awful, like horrible secondary, bad team. 8 for 16 for Brandon Harris against Syracuse. He went 4 for 14 against a MAC team, Eastern Michigan, 4 for 14. Now, I can understand some of these lower percentage games because he went for the deep ball. Like Western Kentucky only went 11 for 20, but he threw for 286. So he was gunning it down the field, picking up big plays. But Alabama, we all watched that game gun to gun and saw how the Tide just stacked up Leonard Fournette. They didn't even think about Brandon Harris, and he could only go 6 for 19 against a defense that was locked in on the run and loading the box. That's all he could do. And we know Alabama's great, but they sold out against the run, and he could only burn them for a couple decent plays when the game was out of hand. 7 for 21 against Texas A&M. You can have maybe 1 or 2 games maybe like that throughout the year. And fortunately, because of the defense that plays on the other side of the ball and because of Leonard Fournette, he got away with most of those games against those teams. But otherwise, my goodness, he had like 3 decent games.
Yeah, you go and you look at that, man. The Mississippi game, he had 300 plus yards, and there was 300 plus yards passing. Still lost that game. You're right. You go back and you look at his percentages, and they're all relatively really low. I mean, when you've got some 30 and 20 percentile, completion percentages, and especially like you said against an Eastern Michigan team, you turn around, you look at 31% against Alabama, 33% against A&M that we just talked about. Which quite honestly, not surprised by the fact with Chavis being on the other side of the ball there on the other team. So I don't find that as much shocking. But that being said, I mean, some of these ratings were just awful. Yards per attempt. I mean, they have to be. I'd have to dig into it a little bit further, but they have to be some of the worst in the conference as far as a quarterback is concerned, except for maybe Vanderbilt, of course. But they've got multiple issues. But that being said. I think that, Brandon Harris has just got to be able to show it on the field. Can he have success and read through his progressions? LSU's got talent. We know that, Mark. They've got talent through and through. They've got talent at depth, and that's an area LSU's never really had a problem with. Even with the changing of the guard from Saban to Les Miles. They've consistently had really talented depth there at LSU. It's easy to do when you recruit those type of guys right there in your backyard. So it's not a lack of that. It's a lack of having a quarterback, which to me is just it's shocking that LSU has struggled so mightily in the last several years since Mettenberger's success of having a good quarterback. And especially under the system with Cam Cameron, I would just assume with him coming with that NFL pedigree, that this wouldn't be an issue for LSU as much as it has been. And it makes not just me, LSU fans, maybe even some of the media pundits as well, question, is Cam Cameron the guy? Is this the system that needs to be in play at LSU? If not, maybe what saves Les Miles' job is changing of the guard or the offensive coordinator. And even that, I don't know for sure. But one thing's for sure, with the way of the state government and the way their funding and things of that nature is in Louisiana right now, they really can't afford to get rid of Les. So something's going to have to be fixed on that side of the ball. And it may just be Cam Cameron that ends up getting the boot if they don't have the success on offense that we expect them to this year.
And if Brandon Harris isn't the guy going into a third season, you would think that, that they would have been able to find somebody with all the talent that they can recruit at all the other positions, that they would have found somebody else. And that guy as a backup, if Brandon Harris is that much of a disaster, and I don't think he will be. I think we're going to see something similar to what we saw this year, this past season, 2015. Danny Etling is a kid that gained a lot of starts at Purdue and is a serviceable backup, but you don't want to see him on the field against the better teams in the SEC. But there's not a whole lot that we're expecting out of Brandon Harris. He doesn't have to go 28 for 35 every game and throw for 350 yards. He needs to go 12 for 20 and take care of the football and hit on about 3 or 4 big plays and make teams have to respect the pass. is all he needs to do. But the percentages have to, across the board, not be so sporadic and throwing for 30 and 35% completion percentage against bad teams and against key teams like Texas A&M and Alabama.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the thing. Can you win the big ones? Can he be the guy that puts the game on his shoulders and wins it for you? You know, it's really eerily similar to talking about Brandon Allen at Arkansas last year prior to the season. We're talking about Brandon Harris almost in the same light. And I think that's an area where LSU fans, I think, would be really encouraged to see him be able to go out there and you not necessarily have to depend on Fournette to win a game. And I'm not talking about an Eastern Michigan. I'm talking about either a conference game or an out-of-conference game, like, say, for example, that Wisconsin matchup at Lambeau Field, which, by the way, I think we both agree would be awesome to be there just for the historical perspective of being in Lambeau Field. But, if he's able to come in, say, in that game and makes a big difference for them and is able to put up some nice yards and put up a nice, finishes with a nice completion percentage, I think you have to feel encouraged about going into the rest of the season if he's able to do that. And I think that's going to be the first big test for Brandon Harris. We know what Fournette can do, but let's see what Brandon Harris can do in the spotlight at 2:30, in Lambeau Field against Wisconsin to kick off the season. That's going to be, it may not be dark and the lights may not be on, but I promise you national spotlight will be all over this game. So I'm looking forward to that one. And I think that's going to be the telltale for us and kind of give us a gauge of what to expect from him this season.
Yeah, and without digging into the depth charts, I think we both have a pretty good barometer on this game in regards to talent. LSU is a more talented, faster team across the board than Wisconsin. They've got a decided advantage, but it's not a huge advantage where there's some overwhelming favorite. They're going to be a solid 7-point favorite, I would think, against Wisconsin, and they should win the game. But Wisconsin's going to They had a all freshman offensive line play last year. So these guys are going to be much better this year. We're going to see more of a traditional Wisconsin running attack. They actually got away from the run last year just because they had to. They didn't have the back. They lost Melvin Gordon. They couldn't replace him. Clement was their backup the previous season. He was supposed to be the starter. He missed a bunch of games. Again, they had 4 freshman offensive linemen playing. They're going to be back to Wisconsin football on offense. They're going to be sound on defense, not extremely athletic. They did lose a couple players to the NFL, but it's going to be a game that LSU can't mess with, that they should win based on just sheer talent, but it's not going to be a blowout. It should be a rock'em sock'em game with a lot of physical play out there.
Yeah, I expect it to be, and especially being right there in Wisconsin's backyard. This having the historical feel, just the privilege of being able to be on Lambeau Field as a collegiate player. I think this is going to be a hot ticket. Tickets have been on sale already. I think the closer you get, it's going to be a sellout, no doubt in my mind. And I've also been told that the AD Barry Alvarez is thinking that possibly ESPN's game day crew shows up at that game, and that'd be another plus to that. I mean, you're talking about making it even that much more of a high profile game, but I think that's going to be the case. It's going to be one of 6 games to kick off the season. That's going to be a major out of conference. So I think that in my opinion, out of those, this is the one that to me shines the brightest, just because you've got a perennial traditional SEC powerhouse going up north to play Wisconsin in their own backyard. Kudos to them for doing this, for a home and home like this, or somewhat home anyways, for both of these teams. But I think this is going to be a huge game. And it also, it's going to bring out the SEC haters, and it's going to bring out the trash talking between conferences, because if LSU drops this one against Wisconsin in Lambeau, there'll be a lot of trash talking going on. You'll want to stay off the message board, that's for sure.
That's right. It was probably a pretty decent compromise, considering that's like a home field, but not exactly home field for Wisconsin, similar to what Wisconsin faced in going down to Reliant Stadium to play LSU at Houston 2 years ago. And that was a really good game where Wisconsin looked like they had the win. Tigers came back, won at 28-24 late. Really good football game there, and we expect more of the same at Lambeau.